morning, everybody. Happy Hump Day to you. It is March 5th, 2025. I've got all your news for your rush hour ride to work, and here's what we got today. Bald eagles were born in Big Bear. Motion to rename it Big Eagle. Big win for the California park. Also, in other animal news, we're going to start this episode with some nice animal stories, fluffy ones, to get our mood right for all the serious topics out there. I guess they've merged a mouse with a woolly mammoth and created a woolly mouse. This is the start of a horror film, if you ask me. Speaking of horror, Alec Baldwin recounts the sort of terrible year he had following the shooting death of Helena Hutchins. And he's got a reality show where he, I guess, was exposed that he considered taking his life after having survivor's remorse. So we'll share that story. And also in the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni world, big win for the New York Times, not so much for Justin Baldoni, as the court suspends proceedings and waits to hear if they're going to dismiss New York Times from the case. I'll explain all of that. And in the tariff world, a prime minister candidate in Canada says if she's elected, there'll be 100% tariffs on Tesla. I'll also discuss Trump's speech last night, give a general overview of my thoughts about it, and also the Democratic response to that speech. So lots to get into. We're all over the map. Let's start it right now on The Rush. Well, it's the morning, so we have to start with a feel-good story. Jackie and Shadow, the bald eagles known in Big Bear, they have a live stream camera, have, I guess, cracked an egg. Here's the Today Show story. There's a new baby in town.
A live look at a bald eagle's nest in Big Bear Valley, California. Why are we showing it to you? Well, a bald eagle couple who you probably already know, Jackie and Shadow, just had their eaglet overnight. The video shows how it happened. It was about 2:30 this morning, East Coast time. You see the chick cracking through its shell. Are we seeing that? Oh my gosh, look at that.
Look at that.
And there it is. The chick comes out. I mean, and this is a big story because last year the eggs didn't hatch. And I guess we're supposed to feel bad for these birds. I don't know if birds feel emotions. I mean, birds are savages, right? They're just like leftover dinosaurs. There was a bird's nest outside my old house in Los Angeles, and we kept on finding a little bird on the ground, and we would put it back in the nest, and every day kept finding it again. Turns out the mother bird was throwing it out of the nest. What are they doing? And they'll say, well, they got to throw one out so the others will survive or whatever, but have a little compassion, birds. All right, in other animal news, the first woolly mouse marks huge step in bringing back the woolly mammoth. And to answer the question nobody asked, why are we doing this?
A huge breakthrough. Scientists have now managed to genetically engineer mice to have woolly mammoth traits. Meet the woolly mouse. It's the latest development from Colossal, a company trying to bring back extinct species.
So we did not know that they would be this adorable, which makes us even more excited about the mammoth.
Ben told me they're on track to make a woolly mammoth by 2028, after they last walked the earth around 4,000 years ago. But when they say woolly mammoth, they actually mean an elephant whose DNA has been edited to include mammoth genes.
All right, so as we've been covering this story for a while, so I guess in order to try to make the woolly mammoth, they got to first make a woolly mouse. I guess why don't we just make universal health care? Why don't we make it so that Americans can survive? No, I get it. They're scientists. They're doing scientist things. I support this type of funding, until, we melt the permafrost and all these ancient diseases come back. But hey, that's another problem that's for the afternoon episode, right? All right, let's go to Baldwin. Alec Baldwin in the news. Reality TV show ripped to shreds by Helena Hutchins' family attorney. Now, I don't know how I feel about this, but their attorney is Gloria Allred, and she's tearing into Baldwin's new TLC reality show, The Baldwins, which follows Alec Baldwin and his wife Hilaria as they juggle their chaotic family life. She says the show celebrates Mr. Baldwin's joy of being with his children while ignoring the fact that Alec Baldwin took a child away from her parents. That is the painful and actual reality with which Helena's parents and sister live each and every day. Which, by the way, I don't think that's a fair summation of what went down with Alec Baldwin. Yes, he pulled the trigger on set, but he's not in jail because I think the armorer was the one who got charged, right? There weren't supposed to be live bullets. Either way, it was a tragedy, and I think it's fair to say that no one intended to kill somebody, even if there was negligence there. So much so, and again, I'm not a defender of Alec Baldwin. I think you just have to be fair. It's hard to have grace out there for someone like Alec Baldwin because he's kind of an a-hole. But I think we can all be fair. Multiple things can be true. It can be terrible for Helena Hutchins' family. And at the same time, this is a nightmare scenario to live with. Alec wanted to kill himself after shooting Rust. Here's what his wife had to say.
I found these text messages the other day between us, the day after, and he said he wanted to kill himself.
Mm-hmm.
He has survivor's guilt. You're involved in this thing that nobody could even possibly imagine. And so it goes back to that day. He wishes it were him.
And of course, look, I'm not promoting the show. I don't think I'll ever watch it, but I believe them. I believe them that this is an absolute tragedy for them, and it doesn't take away from the other tragedy. All right, well, let's get into this Deadline article here that says, Stop the Discovery. New York Times granted win in Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni clash as dismissal pondered by judge. That's a healthy title. There's a lot to get into here. I'm going to be speaking with my favorite lawyer friends later on today. You might catch that interview tomorrow. So we'll get the lawyer sort of perspective of what's going on. Is this normal or not? Now, when Justin Baldoni sued the New York Times, everyone pretty much said the same thing, which is it's going to be a tough case because they've got First Amendment protections. And the question's going to, the main question that's being asked of the judge before he decides to dismiss the case or let it go to trial is, was the New York Times operating as a journalist or a co-conspirator with Blake Lively? Now, that's going to be hard to prove co-conspirator, and we'll talk to the lawyers to find out all the details, but it's actually very interesting here what was said by the New York Times. Today, almost a year before the unlikely to settle matter goes to trial on March 29th, 2026, the Times was clearly feeling justified in its stance. Here's what the Times had to say. We appreciate the court's decision today, which recognizes the important First Amendment values at stake here. The court has stopped Mr. Baldoni from burdening the Times with discovery requests in a case that should never have been brought. Listen, it's a pretty cocky stance from them. At worst, the New York Times today very shitty job in journalism at worst. Now, here is what we have from the actual paper, from the actual court documents. Consolidated defendant, the New York Times, moves pursuant to federal rule of civil procedure for a stay of discovery as it relates to the New York Times pending a decision on its motion to dismiss. The motion is granted. So that's the stay of discovery that they wanted is a motion to stay is essentially a formal request asking the court to suspend proceedings in a case. Essentially, they're saying, hey, we don't want to have to give up discovery and do all of that. Let's wait and see what the judge says. Will we be dismissing this case or not? And again, the judge has to decide, is the New York Times a third party? So will there be evidence that's needed to get from them because of the Blake Lively side of the case, or is it because of the side of the case where Justin's directly suing the New York Times? You see, he's suing the New York Times, he's suing Blake Lively suing them, somehow the guy in Texas is involved. It's pretty complicated stuff. So again, that's where that is at right now. The motion to stay discovery as it relates to the New York Times is granted. So that's where it's at, and we'll have to see what goes down. The Wayfair parties, again, this is from the court documents, the Wayfair parties themselves suggested that discovery from the New York Times is unlikely to be voluminous, to the unlike my hair, which is very voluminous right now. To the extent discovery is sought from the New York Times as a defendant, it can be requested if and when the court denies the pending motion to dismiss. In the meantime, it is evident that the parties will be busy with document discovery from the other parties and with third-party discovery. Again, this is from the judge. Depositions are not anticipated to begin soon. The court hopes to decide the motion well before they do begin. So what the judge is basically saying is, all right, I haven't decided on if I'm just going to dismiss this thing entirely, but we'll do the motion to stay, aka the request to suspend proceedings in this case, specifically with the New York Times, until we figure that all out. So I think I figured it out. I think I got you a good answer, right? All right. Coming up next, we're going to have a lot to talk about with regards to tariffs. This will affect your wallet in one way or another. So I think we all need to be educated in it. And we'll talk about Trump's speech and what is being said, including the congressman who was kicked out of the speech early on, what he has to say immediately after being kicked out, and where everybody stands. So we'll have all of that for you next. All right, this is going to sound really boring, but I'm going to share what Ronald Reagan said. Look, he looks like he's doing a podcast, doesn't he? Doesn't he look like Tucker Carlson, right? He's got like the wood panel in the background. He's got the microphone out. He's dressed in flannel. I don't know. But here's what he had to say about tariffs. Again, in today's world, I don't even think Ronald Reagan would be welcomed in the Republican Party. But let's just have a listen to what he had to say decades ago.
You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity.
Wow, interesting stuff. Now, I could probably point to a million things I don't agree with regards to his policies, but that was before my time. But it's interesting to discuss because, look, surgically speaking, maybe a specific tariff on a specific item to help, homegrown, I would love if there was certain things that would help the industry here. But what we're learning is there's always a way to sort of circumvent tariffs. Here is Chinese-owned factories. They're just moving to Cambodia to avoid the tariff.
2-hour drive outside the Cambodian capital Phnom Penh, a convoy of semi-trailers passed by. Let's drive straight through. Moments later, an enormous arch greeted us with signage in 2 languages, the local language Khmer and beneath Chinese.
All right, so I could play the whole thing, but the fact is they just moved their operations to another country, and it kind of becomes one of those games of cat and woolly mouse, as it were. Here is what's going on in the United States of America. An $80,000 Dodge Ram truck instantly became $100,000. Who's spending $100,000 on a truck? And this was reported on Fox Business.
The impact on the tariffs, Maria. This Dodge Ram truck, $80,000, instantly became $100,000. Could be grand.
Now, Trump said that he might even get rid of these tariffs today or tomorrow, so it could just be a big bluff, but they are into effect as I'm recording this. And why is this a big deal? Because we, the consumer, end up paying the price, and as Reagan said, it is war. A trade war is a war. It is a war fought with the wallet, and who amongst the middle class here has the money to sort of weigh this thing out? Now, Canada's not messing around, and you know what? As an American, I actually respect it. I'm like, dang, Canada's got some fight in them. Here is the Canadian Prime Minister candidate, and she reveals she'll have 100% tariff, which means if you wanted to buy a $50,000 Tesla in Canada, the 100% tariff means it's now $100,000. Essentially, just destroying the market for a Tesla in Canada. Have a listen to this.
And our retaliation is going to be surgically targeted to create the maximum pressure on the White House to stop what the Wall Street Journal has described quite rightly as the dumbest trade war in history. An example of a measure that I will put in place as Prime Minister is 100% tariffs on Teslas. I think that should get some attention in the White House.
I think so. But hey, look, how's the White House going to get out of this? How's Trump going to get out of this? What's he going to say? He's currently saying that the Canadian and Mexican trade wars are because of a fentanyl crisis. There is no fentanyl crisis coming from Canada. That just doesn't exist right now. And they've already addressed that a month ago, that they're beefing up systems to try to find the fentanyl. There is a fentanyl crisis. It ain't from Canada. But, one way for the executive branch to get unilateral control over tariffs is to say it's done because of an emergency. So it's a fake emergency. It makes you beg the question, like, who do you want to get your news from, right? Do you want to get it from senators in the U.S. who are clearly just trying to kiss the president's ass because Elon Musk said that anyone that disagrees with the president, they're going to primary, which means they're going to put someone up to fight against them, which is just ridiculous that's the thing, like that it's that easy to get someone to not share their opinion? Or do you want to go with maybe international news, which has a complete, like in Canada, they're essentially saying, look, this is the dumbest trade war in history. And yet here we have our Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, pretty much, outwardly just saying lies. Like he knows he's lying. This is what he said yesterday.
I think these tariffs are oriented around a specific objective. In this case, to reduce the amount of fentanyl coming into this country across our northern and southern borders.
Like, how does this reduce fentanyl? They've already committed, both sides, Mexico and Canada, to having a task force of troops that are going to do this and that. I mean, most fentanyl comes from legal ports of entry, which means it's coming through the shipping industry or, so many, it's not people throwing it over the wall or whatever, floating across the Rio Grande. So yes, it's coming in originally from China through Mexico, 99%, right? And then like less than 1% from Canada. But I just think we're not doing a good enough job calling out our leaders who are clearly, like, they're not dumb people. They're just not willing to tell you, the audience, the truth. And whether you like me or not, I'm going to give you my honest opinion at all times.
And, so these tariffs, I think, are hopefully temporary. What I'm willing to do is give the president some latitude to try and accomplish the objective he seeks to get done here.
What is the objective? Pissing off Canada, pissing off Mexico, pissing off the European Union. They're all in a new group chat without us. They're going to be, doing, military armaments so they can regain some, what is the strategy for the American people? I mean, I wrote it down and we'll talk about this after the speech. Agenda for working class people, affordable college, affordable healthcare, lower housing prices. What the fuck is any of this got to do with that? And people that argue on behalf of tariffs say, well, in the long term, it actually brings jobs back to us. Okay, so putting a tariff on an avocado is really going to help us out here, right? I understand surgically some tariffs might make sense, but these blanket tariffs, and Trump said he's going to do a retaliatory tariff if they decide to put a tariff on our tariffs. So right now, there's a 25% tariff on any goods that come in from Canada. Canada's going to match that. So now Trump's going to match, this is the war that the billionaires can pay because they don't care if an avocado's $13. It doesn't matter to them because they've all invested in Trump's Bitcoin. It doesn't matter to them. It matters to you, the middle class, the people that are the ones getting robbed.
I think, I'm a different place on tariffs probably than some of my colleagues and certainly maybe the administration.
They have to be so careful. I'm in a different place on this. Why don't you fight like hell for what you believe in? Why don't you do that? I hope everybody that is not honest with their constituents gets primaried and loses, because this is absolutely ridiculous that we don't have people, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, fighting for Americans here. They all went up and cheered these quote unquote tax cuts. The only people that are going to receive tax cuts are the ultra wealthy. It's laid out in the plan. You making anywhere under $400,000 will pay more money. The tax cuts do not kick in until you're making above $400,000. If you're making over $1 million, you'll now receive an additional X amount, like something like $36,000 a year, which would be great money that we could dole out to the people that can't even afford a $400 emergency. So either way, I just think it's a joke. Warren Buffett, he's a smart guy. He's one of the richest people in the world, right? He knows what he's talking about. He describes tariffs as an act of war.
How do you think tariffs will affect the economy?
I mean, tariffs are actually, we've had a lot of experience with them. They're an act of war to some degree.
How do you think tariffs will impact inflation?
Over time, they're a tax on goods. I mean, the tooth fairy doesn't pay up. I mean, and see, you always have to just, and then what? You always have to ask that question in economics. Always say, and then what?
So is there an answer for that when people say, inflation persists, consumer prices keep going up, when's the end in sight?
No, prices will be higher 10 years from now and 20 years from now and 30 years from now.
And what do you think about what's happening in Washington right now? about efforts to
I think
cut
it's
the-
Washington.
Yeah.
It's, technology changes things, all kinds of things, but Washington is Washington. And the problem with politics is that it tend to have to make tiny compromises as you go along.
Yeah, well, easy to say when you're a billionaire, right? Tiny compromises might make somebody not be able to afford rent this month and be homeless. That's what I think about these tiny compromises. And I don't see any compromises happening. I got some more thoughts on Trump's speech last night, and I'll share that with you next. All right, here we have Representative Al Green. He was escorted out of the speech here, raising his cane, protesting what should be budget cuts that are probably going to cut into Medicaid. Some say Social Security. We're going to have to see. They're going to look for $880 billion in tax cuts, and people say it's going to be hard to find them in any other place other than people's Medicaid, which is, health care for sometimes the elderly or poor, kids and, different, a lot of, something like a third of insurance in our country is Medicaid. So when that goes, if it does, that means it's going to raise the price of everyone else's health insurance. So not looking good. And the question I have, and a lot of people have, is what are you doing for the middle class to lower inflation? Tariffs are only going to increase inflation. The GDP is projected to actually go down. If it goes down for 2 quarters, that's a recession. This is not good, folks. And I'm not here to fearmonger. In fact, watching this speech, you look at fear and how it's used, and it's hard to be analytical while also living in a world of fear. A lot of culture war issues were spoken about, but I think all these other culture war issues are ironed out when the economy's really strong. And I'm not just saying when the stock market's strong, but when people really feel like their money goes a long way. So as I mentioned before, lower housing prices, the American dream, trying to make it so that people don't have to work multiple jobs, raising the minimum wage, maternity leave, taking care of everybody with universal health care. Nobody's mentioning this stuff. And you know what? I can be highly critical of the Democratic Party too. After Luigi happened, every single day, they should be just telling people the most popular positions, which is a universal healthcare system, in all of these other programs that we could afford to do. So Trump's tax cuts for the ultra wealthy are actually going to add $4 trillion in debt. That's like a lot of money, folks, okay? So all of this idea about, Doge is finding money in this and finding money in that, it's not going back to us. You have to remember that it's not going back to us. It's going to be used to fund the tax cuts for the ultra wealthy. So it's really just a billionaire in office with a billionaire sidekick, Elon Musk, putting together legislation that's going to rob us in the middle class and just continue to siphon that money upwards to the billionaires. And for some reason, I get a lot of bootlickers that want to be like, well, no, come on, the billionaires aren't that bad. It's like, what world do we live in where we are defending the billionaires? They should be taxed more. They shouldn't have enough money to buy elections. They shouldn't have enough money to buy J.D. Vance, $100 million, whatever they spent on him to become a senator before he, the billionaires shouldn't be able to have so much money that they can try to put all of that money into different puppets that can then be in the Oval Office that can help them with their directives. You sound like a conspiracy theorist when you talk about this, but I just don't think anyone should have that much individual power. So does Representative Al Green. Here's what he had to say after being kicked out.
There, you're yelling at the president. What were you saying to him?
I was telling him that he does not have a mandate to cut Medicaid.
And the speaker told you to sit down, and you refused to sit down, and that's why they kicked you out.
That is correct. And by the way, if there's a punishment, I will accept a punishment. This is not about me. This is about the people who are going to suffer if Medicaid is cut and if Social Security is cut. We need to raise the cap on Social Security. We need to protect Medicare. And for God's sake, don't cut Medicaid. This is for poor people.
Republicans have said that they don't have any exact plans to cut Medicaid right now. It's not spelled out in their budget blueprint.
Well, it doesn't have to be spelled out if the budget blueprint requires them to make the cuts that they have said they're going to make.
So what happens is they said the budget blueprint is to make $880 million in cuts. And let me tell you where that's coming from. It's coming from Medicaid, which is the health insurance for old people and for poor people and kids.
They'll have to cut it. They'll have to cut it. And by the way, I don't want it block granted to states. To send it to the states, Texas refused $100 billion in Medicaid money. $100 billion with a B, because Texas didn't want to put in any portion of the cost to help poor people.
Leader Jeffries called for decorum. He called for a dignified democratic presence. Do you feel you were following his wishes by standing up and disrupting?
I was following the wishes of conscience.
And I think that's great. It's civil disobedience. That's what it should be. He raised his cane. Let's go back to the photo. He raised his cane, and he wasn't willing to sit idly by. And that's what you want from your elected official. Did he get kicked out? Yeah, he didn't go down kicking and screaming. He raised his civil disobedience. He made a public statement, and then he walked out like a man. And that's what he did. And God bless this guy, Democrat representative from Texas. So again, I think it's great that I mean, look, we have a 13-year-old cancer survivor earning a standing ovation as he becomes a Secret Service agent during the Trump speech. He had brain cancer. Look, I think this is great. I just don't know if this belongs in the address to the nation. There's 330 million people, and to share individual stories, I get it. It pulls at our heartstrings, but that's when you know you're being conned, right? When you can see a story that pulls out your heartstrings, and then the next story is how you're getting robbed blind in your tax cuts, or you're not getting your taxes raised. It makes you worry. It's nothing against this guy. It's just that they're kind of props, really. But you know what? I mean, I wish him well, and it was great to see him hug the guy who gave him the Secret Service badge. That was very nice. But again, it's just political theater. And by the way, speaking of brain cancer, we were supporting a friend of our program, Benji. He's 10 years old and he's fighting a brain tumor. He has brain cancer. And thanks to you guys, we raised an additional $1,000 yesterday. So I want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for donating money to a stranger, to a boy. I wish we didn't live in a world where we need to use GoFundMes to support people's health care. And, his mom, Katie, who's a member of our community, probably has a hard time going to work and keeping a job. I'm sure she's going to the hospital all the time to help out. So my heart bleeds for them right now. If you have any additional funds, I'll post a link in the description of this video, and you can help donate to their cause. And we really wish him well. At the very least, everyone can send some positive love. So the Democratic response to the speech last night, typically if there's a Republican president, you give a Democratic response and vice versa, was Senator Alyssa Slotkin. She's new and she's a Democrat from Michigan. And I'm going to play 3 of her clips right here. Have a listen.
While we're on the subject of Elon Musk, is there anyone in America who is comfortable with him and his gang of 20-year-olds using their own computer servers to poke through your tax returns, your health information, and your bank accounts? No oversight, no protections against cyber attack, no guardrails on what they do with your private data. We need a more efficient government. You want to cut waste? I'll help you do it. But change doesn't need to be chaotic or make us less safe. The mindless firing of people who work to protect our nuclear weapons, keep our planes from crashing, and conduct the research that finds the cure for cancer, only to rehire them 2 days later? No CEO in America could do that without being summarily fired.
And Elon Musk has this idea where you break it first and then see what needs fixing, see what's essential and what's not. That just doesn't fly. So many people were fired, and then when it came to hiring them back the next day, they were locked out of their email addresses. You know what I mean? This was a colossal mess up. I mean, you have food that's going bad, farmers that have lost grants, these are American companies that they lost their livelihood all recklessly. You do the audit first and then you find the waste. Instead, they fired everybody and now they're doing it backwards. This is so chaotic. So when people go, oh, don't you want to save money in the country? Sure, absolutely. Do the audit. And here is what Ronald Reagan would be rolling in his grave over Trump's embrace of Russia.
President Trump loves to say peace through strength. That's actually a line he stole from Ronald Reagan. But let me tell you, after the spectacle that just took place in the Oval Office last week, Reagan must be rolling in his grave. We all want an end to the war in Ukraine, but Reagan understood that true strength required America to combine our military and economic might with moral clarity. And that scene in the Oval Office wasn't just a bad episode of reality TV. It summed up Trump's whole approach to the world. He believes in cozying up to dictators like Vladimir Putin and kicking our friends like the Canadians in the teeth. He sees American leadership as merely a series of real estate transactions.
And, I'm hearing a lot of people say, well, why? It's not our war to fight or whatever. But, it's so well known throughout the international world that Putin is not going to stop at 20% of Ukraine. He is in it to take over Ukraine. This is not two countries fighting an equal battle. So I think the rest of the world understands that. And I think a lot of Americans do too. And I'm not one who wants war. I'm a pacifist. All right, here is setting the record straight on the economy.
Talked a big game on the economy, but it's always important to read the fine print. So, do his plans actually help Americans get ahead? Not even close. President Trump is trying to deliver an unprecedented giveaway to his billionaire friends. He's on the hunt to find trillions of dollars to pass along to the wealthiest in America. And to do that, he's going to make you pay in every part of your life. Grocery and home prices are going up, not down. And he hasn't laid out a credible plan to deal with either of those.
Yeah, so there's your Democratic response. And if I might just say, just for those going, Dave, we don't care about politics. I'm giving you extra long podcast episodes. Normally they're like 20 minutes long. We're cracking 35 minutes on these morning ones. So I'm just giving you more content if you are interested in this. I do think a lot of people are, but I also understand that those that have found me from Bachelor News or other justice-oriented news that I've done might be a little triggered that we're all of a sudden talking politics. I can't tell you how many people said, oh, Dave, you're so misinformed, you're so uneducated, you're so this, you're so that. All I'm doing essentially is sharing video clips of Democrats and Republicans. The problem is when you hear about a Republican that you don't like their opinion, they call him a rhino, Republican in name only. Like, what is that? No, we're all allowed different opinions and the good ones rise to the top. We're going to see what happens in our country moving forward. I mean, I've got money invested in the stock market. I don't want to see all of the gains that I've made in the last couple of years washed away because there's inflation and tariffs. I pay an exorbitant amount of money in interest rates because they weren't able to get inflation under control, and that's just how it all works. I don't want that to be the case. I don't want to be burning my money up. I just don't see us going in the direction that's solving a lot of those issues. All right, we'll have to see. A lot of content coming your way today. Lots of Blake Lively updates. I think I got one involving Taylor Swift. Stick around for all of that. We'll be right back.